Hey everybody, I hope and pray that you're doing well today. As we come to our word from the Word, and today that word is contrast. Contrast. Now, a lot of times we talk about comparing and contrasting, but here as we look at the Psalm of David today in Psalm 35, it's you're going to see a comparison and a contrast. I said it again there, but that you're going to see this in the way that David was praying for others and the way he was dealing with others, and now you're going to see him praying that God would rescue him from his enemies and looking at the way that his enemies were treating him. The sad part of the sad truth of the whole matter is these are his friends, some of them, that are now being compared with enemies. There was really no difference between his friends or his enemies. And I know I don't have to tell any of you because we've all been in those places in our lives where some of those that were maybe once closest to us are now seem to be the ones that were against us the most, or the ones that seem to really hurt us the most. But there's always seems to be a question that we ask, and it's a question that David asked here as well. But we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's just dive right in. Psalm 35, looking at verses 11 through the first part of verse 17. God's word says this, says, "Fierce witnesses rise up. They ask me things that I do not know. They reward me evil for good to the sorrow of my soul. But as for me, when they were sick, my clothing was sackcloth. I humbled myself with fasting, and my prayer would return to my own heart. I paced about as though he were my friend or brother. I bowed down heavily as one who mourns for his mother. But in my adversity, they rejoiced and gathered together. Attackers gathered against me, and I did not know it. They tore at me and did not cease. With ungodly mockers at feast, they gnashed at me with their teeth. Lord, how long will you look on?" And it goes on, but I just think about that question that we would all say, and that we've probably all said: God, how long? How long are we going to have to go through this before you rescue us? Yeah, it's funny. We were just talking about this past Wednesday night from looking at a portion of Psalm 119. But over and over, we see through the psalmists, through the prophets, we see comparisons of God, this is the way the enemy does, but God, this is what I'm doing. God, this is what I know you told us to do, but I see what the enemy's doing, but that's not me. I want to be obedient. And even here, he's saying, look, I'm looking back at the way that I was treating these people, and now look at how they're treating me. And I think sometimes he had treated them well, but now they were repaying his good with evil. And I'm sure you can probably think of scenarios where you have looked and maybe you have done something and good, and you've treated people well, and then they repaid that good deed with evil. Right? I mean, it's sad that even in our day and age, in our society, we say no good deed goes unpunished. Have you ever just stopped to think about what that means spiritually? If we look at a good deed as something that's going to be punished, that we're going to have to pay a price for, then it keeps us from doing those good deeds. It keeps us from doing the things that we ought to, the things that God has told us to do. See, the one thing that we need to remember through all of this is there has to be a difference in the way that believers treat everybody and the way that unbelievers treat everybody. You know, if you look across the globe, you will find sometimes, and really, I'd even say oftentimes, that you'll find unbelievers that treat others better than believers treat one another, and even than believers treat unbelievers. See, that's a terrible witness. That's a terrible truth that we are destroying the testimony of what a Christian ought to be because there is no contrast. That gets us back to that word, right? That when they start to compare, Believers and unbelievers. When an unbeliever starts looking, he says, well, look, I see these unbelievers and I see this group of believers. And either they don't see a difference at all, they don't see a contrast, and they think, well, what do I need that for? What do I need God for? What do I need salvation for? Or they see a difference, but they see the unbeliever in more of a positive light than they do a believer. Now, see, even as we go through that, you probably can think of other people. You think, yeah, I know they need to do better. Oh, yes, they need to do better. Let's not worry about them. What about each one of us, right? When I ask the question, what about me? What am I doing? When you ask the question, what about you? Do you look any different than an unbeliever? Do you act any different than an unbeliever? Do you love any different than an unbeliever? Is there a contrast in the way that you treat others and the way that they treat you? And don't always assume that you're doing better, that you're doing I guess to get a little prideful there and say that, well, I'm the example for them. Let's be careful, not be prideful. Let's let God and His Word humble us. And at the end of the day, when we ask God, how long will you let this continue? We'll trust in Him. We'll continue to go forward in faith, knowing that we're doing our part. But if we're not doing our part, I wonder if it's not God asking us the question, son, daughter, how long until you obey? God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.